Welcome back to the Gardening with Joy and Holly radio show. Moments away, Angela Ferraro-Fanning will be with us. But first, a word from our good friends at Rise Gardens.
Rise Gardens is a revolutionary hydroponic gardening system for your home. Instead of food traveling hundreds or even thousands of miles before it hits your plate, harvest the veggies, herbs, and greens you need for dinner tonight in the comfort of your home. No green thumb required knowledge. Gardening made easy with the Rise Garden app. Simple step-by-step guidance from seed to harvest. A complete garden on a shelf and comes with everything you need to grow healthy and the freshest food for you and your loved ones. Fully customizable your garden to your needs and preferences. For more information, you can get your Rise Garden. Visit risegardens.com.
Holly, let's go to the hotline and bring in our guest for this week.
Angela is the farmer and content creator behind Axe and Root Homestead. She is also the author and blogger. Her book, The Sustainable Homestead, Create a Thriving Permaculture Ecosystem for Your Garden, Animals, and Land, just came out in March. Welcome to the program, Angela.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us, not only educating Holly and myself, but all of our listeners. And I want to start with this question. Was homesteading something you knew you always wanted to do, or how did you get into this, or was this something like a happy accident in life and you found out you loved it?
A happy accident is a good way to put it. I had no experience in farming. I don't come from a farming family. It was not on my radar. Not when I was in high school, college, nor when I pursued my own graphic and website design career and then had my own business. It actually wasn't until after I had my first child that I wanted to quit the daily grind, get out from behind the computer, and do something that felt real more raw and tangible to me. And that's how I kind of found homesteading.
And when you're a homesteader or you're an independent contractor, some people may label that being you have nobody to answer to but yourself. And if it doesn't get done, you didn't do it.
Absolutely right. It's a very demanding job. And it's also an addictive job because the more skills that you learn and the sense of accomplishment that comes with accomplishing tasks and learning that you certainly can do things kind of segues into trying to figure out how to do other things. And so it snowballs before you know it. So while it is hard work, it's also very rewarding work.
Fantastic. Now, many people might not know what permaculture is. What is it? And maybe some examples, but also what is our common average ways that the home gardener might be already practicing permaculture and not even realize it?
Sure. So permaculture really just stands for literally permanent agriculture. And what it is, it's a way to farm or garden in alignment with nature and also in a way that mimics patterns that already exist in nature. So ways that people might be doing this already that they don't think about is with companion planting. Many gardeners are very familiar with the concept of companion planting and using flowers, herbs, or other crops even to help their main crop attract beneficial insects and repel unwanted ones, and in some cases, even disease. And so that would be a way that Mother Nature in the wild, if you think about it in a forest or in a meadow, would sort of put different plants together that actually help one another out. Another common one is fruit tree guilds. This is gaining more popularity. You wouldn't just plant an apple tree and stick it in the ground. You'd actually surround that apple tree with helpers and create a little neighborhood, an ecosystem of plants that not only repel and attract the desired insects, but also absorb nutrients from the soil, fix nitrogen, keep the soil cool, retain moisture, that sort of thing. Those are all things that already exist in Mother Nature.
So with planting things around a fruit tree, I'm assuming there's specific requirements that plant needs based on the shade availability that the fruit trees are producing.
That's absolutely right. One thing that I did in my book, The Sustainable Homestead, was sort of create these recipes where the members of your fruit tree guild are going to differ if you're planting an apple versus a fig versus a pear or even a cherry, or something like a blueberry or a raspberry or a blackberry. They all have their own needs, right? And so we want to make sure that we're supplying them with the right friends or beneficial helpers to really maximize their growth habit in the soil that they're in.
And I think you've seen it and we've seen it that we as gardeners and homesteaders, we think we know better than Mother Nature does, and we're going to do it this way. And why did that not work? And we've done it 4 years this way, and we're going to try it one more time.
You're absolutely right. I mean, if you go down a sidewalk in New York City, you can see that Mother Nature will always win because there's weeds popping up in the cracks, right? But I think the other thing that people really are sort of at fault for is that we take a look at what other people are doing in their gardens, especially on social media and in Pinterest. And what we need to remember is what works for somebody else in their own yard or garden, even if it's right across the street, isn't necessarily going to work for us. Because even though our growing zones could even be the same, our microclimates are different. The grade of the land, whether that be an upward or a downhill slope, how much water retention we have, those things are going to be different. The shade that your maple tree might cast is going to cause a difference in sun than what your neighbor has in their own yard. So really, we just need to get back to looking at what we have right in front of us, put the blinders on, put the earplugs in, and just really try to focus and hone in on your own space.
And oftentimes on those social media sites, they don't post the failures. They only post the pretty things.
Yep, that's true. That's very true.
Your book, The Sustainable Homestead, you mentioned it moments ago. Tell us more about it and something that's in it that would intrigue our listeners to definitely go pick up a copy.
Sure. So The Sustainable Homestead is the resource I wish that I had when I started my homestead. And it goes beyond just soil health. There's obviously a chapter dedicated to that. It goes beyond growing and companion planting and those orchard gills that we talked about before with your fruit trees. It really also takes into consideration the things that you need to keep in mind when assessing your own plot of land or your own site. So really not only understanding and conducting nutrient soil tests and trying to figure out your weather patterns and your microclimate, but also understanding, okay, how are animals in nature going to play a role in this? Certainly when it comes to the garden, you wouldn't want to plant things that are just going to be a feast for deer. Or if you're keeping chickens or ducks or other livestock on your property, I have chapters talking about how could you feed them while also feeding the soil. Grass is great, but it really doesn't do anything for the soil other than perform erosion control, right? It doesn't give any nutrients to the soil. So how can we feed the soil while meet the needs of the animals? And so there's a lot of information in there on that. And then I also discuss composting, because if you have animals and if you have a garden, you're going to have waste. And so we can take that waste and we can make it work for us. And so really a lot of the things that nature does, it works smarter. And so we just kind of have to get back to that. Like you mentioned before, we're never going to outsmart nature. Right. We need to harness the principles that are already there so we can work smarter and not harder and work in alignment with nature and not against it.
Right.
Absolutely. So we were talking with Angela, the farmer content creator behind Axe and Root Homestead, author and blogger. So cover crops seem to be the new gardening buzzword. What are they and what are some good ones? And maybe should everybody be utilizing them, even a smaller home gardener?
Sure. So cover crops are essentially crops that are grown in your garden or in your pasture animal grazing spaces that you grow for the sole purpose of feeding the soil. I mentioned before, I simultaneously grow some to feed my animals, but you would not want to necessarily want to grow something like a forage turnip and then think you're going to harvest the turnips and eat them. The whole point would be to use a forage turnip to help break up soil compaction, because as that radish or that turnip grows and sends down that tap root and widens the soil around it, it's going to break up compaction. And so we want to leave that in there, not only during its growth period, but also allow it to die in place so that it can return the nutrients to the soil. So we want to think of cover crops as soil helpers and leaving them in place. One really great cover crop not many folks know about is sweet alyssum, which you can plant in your garden and is great for attracting bees and beneficial insects. But once the season is finished, don't pull it. Turn it back into the soil. It acts as a green manure or a nutrient fixer into your soil. It's going to add all of those nutrients back in plus more. And so it's really good also to create more organic matter.
And cover crops can be grown in the spring, in the summer, in the fall, and in some places they can be grown in the winter to cover the soil as nature has covered the soil, because we don't want to leave soil bare. Soil doesn't like to be left bare.
Right. So here in the mid-Atlantic, in the fall, I think it was late November, I planted bursting clover, red clover, and hairy vetch in my raised bed gardens. They had enough time to germinate, sprout, and get established, and they stayed green all winter long. And then come spring, I just turned them into the soil by hand. And in some other beds, I also created a little mobile rabbit run, which I dubbed the bun run. And the bunnies went through and grazed all the cover crops out for me. And then I was able to just plant.
Well, we like asking this next question to people because we learn from mistakes. What is a huge mistake a lot of homesteaders make that really you yourself have avoided it or you try to avoid it?
So I absolutely have a mistake that some folks will try to debate about because there's a nuance to it, and that's using hay in your garden as a mulch. So a lot of folks are familiar with the concept of covering soil. We do that to retain moisture and prevent solarization and erosion. We don't want any nutrients to escape. And so we can use straw as a great mulcher, but people assume that hay is very similar. We can use that too, but here's the thing. Straw is from the stem of the grass blade, and hay includes the seed head. So my own mistake, the nearby farm and nursery was out of straw. So I thought this first year that I was doing this, excellent, that's fine. They have hay. I'm going to use that. I very quickly turned into a grass farmer. All of the seed heads just planted themselves into the garden spaces, and it took over, and it was very difficult to garden that year. Weeding was near impossible. And so the nuance is, if you do want to use hay, it needs to be well rotted. We're talking it needs to have had exposure to animal urine, feces. It needs to have been where the seed heads have maybe been trampled, walked over, no longer are there. And then you can take that hay, and this is assuming that there is no required decomposition point that, you would have an animal that would contain pathogens. Then you would be able to use it in your garden space. So I always tell folks, hey, just steer clear of it altogether. Just use straw.
So whenever you made this mistake, were you able to undo it eventually, or did you just move the garden to a place and start it over?
That's a good question. No, I'm still gardening in the same place. It took years. That first season initially was horrible, and I'm still pulling grass that I don't think I probably would have had I not used it that first year.
And there may be some people that would go, hey, we've made this mistake. We're just going to spray it with a weed killer, let it set a year, and then regrow in it. That, I guess, in some people's minds may work, but for organic gardeners and people whom understand what those chemicals can do, that's not an option, as it was not for you.
Correct. Yeah, I'm a no-till farmer, organic gardener. So for me, pulling that root ball out by hand is the best and only way to go.
And you get some feed for the animals with the weeds, if you really have to look at it that way.
That's true.
Well, we've really enjoyed having you on the program. How can people find out more about your great information and your book?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. So this book in particular is called The Sustainable Homestead. I also wrote a series for families, and it's also illustrated for children. It's called the Little Homesteader series. All of these books are available on Amazon or anywhere, such as Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. But if you're looking to find me online, my website address and all of my social media handles, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, is Axe and Root Homestead. So that's AXEAND Root Homestead. And you'll find me there.
Well, Angela, we greatly appreciate you taking time out of your day, not only to educate Holly and myself, but all of our listeners. We thank you for the time you've given us.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.